thanks for coming. Hope you guys are having a decent show. I'm exhausted. We had ISC last week, so if anybody else in Vegas last week, I'm happy for you. I wish I was also one of these people. I want to talk a little bit today about general compliance, including a little bit about the AI Privacy Act or AI Act in the EU and how it applies to biometrics. And I'm going to get kind of cheeky in this presentation, mostly because I'm just jet lagged and exhausted, but also because it's kind of a fun topic to me. I actually like this stuff. I don't know why. I think Lee is convinced I've gone insane. The reason for it is that we've kind of moved past the realm of vision just being with mammals and, well, being with humans, or animals. We've the machine vision, I don't want to call it a revolution, but the machine vision space is exploding. We're now seeing adoption of machine vision in virtually everything, largely from our perspective for stereoscopic vision to see things in the real world, like in 3D, like a human being would, or like another animal would. As that proliferation continues, there's going to be a greater pressure on people like us specifically, and then you guys by extension, in using that in an ethical and compliant way. Compliant, obviously, ethical, perhaps a little bit less so. And the good thing about this is that there are very hard and fast definitions that we can adhere to. I'm not really a rule follower, and I'm sure my wife would love to reinforce that if she was here. But the reality is that we love GDPR for a very good reason, and that it provides the guardrails. So from the use of biometrics in various environments, there are stringent definitions, as you guys probably know, within GDPR about the use of biometric data, and it's because of the inherent sensitive nature of that data being PII. Above and beyond that, I'm going to talk a little bit, not much, but a little bit about the AI Act in the EU and how it applies here, and our understanding of the application of biometric AI implementations with convolutional neural networks specifically in that context. And if that's a mouthful for you, it was also a mouthful for me. I'll try to make that make more sense as we go through. Why I like it. A really good friend of mine was actually was one of the primary authors of the original privacy directive for the EU. And I learned from her as much as I could possibly learn, and she's probably forgotten more than I've ever learned about the space, so I'll do my best to represent Evelyn while I'm here. But I love GDPR because it provides not only teeth, but boundaries. So there's really specific definitions on what we can do and how we do it. That, from my perspective, like we were joking in a panel yesterday, I think it was yesterday, that I do believe that regulations will help actually accelerate our industry in meaningful ways, whereas before we were waiting for that regulation to come. I will tell you that in the United States, it's still the Wild West. We're behind Europe in everything, and especially now, but I don't want to get into that if we can't. We're definitely behind from a regulatory perspective. We talk a lot about it being a patchwork here and across the EU, but GDPR does at least provide that top-level, top-down mandate. We don't have that in the U.S., and certainly we operate in multiple countries. In China, it's a very different situation for different reasons. Across Asia, there's a broad-scale acceptance of biometric use for convenience, and we see the adoption in the EU and across all other European nations is getting a lot stronger because there are those guardrails. In the US, there are like 172 different regulations that I need to comply with. So the result is that people just don't. There are certain states that you can do certain things in, but the other 48, California and Illinois and New York, so 47. Those three states have reasonable privacy definitions. The rest just do not. So, but that being said, they also have regulations. It's just a patchwork. So what we'll do is use GDPR as the framework for this conversation. And again, we'll talk about the AI Act as well. So the reason I like it is not just because I'm insane. I think there's real, like I said, real meat behind this. You've got Articles 12 through 23 that provide the real structural definitions around what we need to adhere to. And I don't want to enumerate all of it in here, but specifically Article 28 around the General Data Protection Regulation processor for data processing. that's what we want to anchor in on, because what I'm trying to work on here, and I do encourage you not just to pitch it, but we can show this physically in action over here. Using your biometric data in a one-to-one way is fundamentally a way to, I almost said get around, to strictly adhere to GDPR. So if I'm not presenting my biometric data to a processor, then by definition, I do not need to worry about how that processor handles my data. And what I'll talk about then is specifically how you can use a single localized device as a self-sovereign physical identity for both the physical and digital. Nope. Okay. So in the context of biometrics, the reason that there's the meat is across a few things. So number one, the explicit use and consent to use data. So again, from our perspective, it's you've got to register your face. So physically, you need to walk up to a device and physically opt in if you're going to use a service like that. So having the ability to enforce your organization's use of explicit opt-in is really, really critical. The second is around employment and contractual requirements. So as an employee of Intel, for example, I have no fundamental right of privacy to my employer. I have to give up my biometric data should they choose to employ it. That is the case with, in the context of GDPR, employers are allowed through explicit and kind of mandated opt-in in the context of the employer. And also there's law enforcement provisions as well. So law enforcement organizations, if it's not being used for the purposes of profiling or for other social constructs, but used for identification, then those rules are separate under GDPR and separate under the AI Act. Vital interest, health-related events, and other emergencies. So if someone needs to be transported to hospital, we can identify who they are, and that's allowed under the provisions. Again, ensuring that you're not sharing that data elsewhere, but from a processor perspective, the healthcare organization or the first responders are allowed to understand who you are as a person from your biometric data. And then under regulatory compliance for very specific legal examples where I need to verify that a human being is compliant with getting into a facility. So if it's a secure facility, there's a set of regulations behind that. I can use the biometric information from that person to allow them or disallow them into that facility under those provisions. In the context of AI, things get enhanced interesting, I should say. We're still digging through what this is going to mean in practice because, as you guys know, we're not quite at deployment stage yet. We're only about a year into the regulation, and things aren't fully codified yet. But as we understand it, biometrics, just like they fall into a special category with GDPR, they fall into an enhanced category. I think it's called Tier 3 in the context of the AI Act. And what that means is it has to be treated with a certain degree of additional responsibility. For example, there are prohibited items that you just can't do in the AI Act with biometrics. So, for example, I can't scan a crowd and determine from the crowd essentially like a social potential for disruption. I have to do that on an individualized basis, not on a crowd basis, and I can't profile based on race or other demographic information that we may be able to abstract. As you get into Tier 3, which is considered high risk, so I'm standing in front of the slide here. As you get into the high risk areas, they're considered high risk when it's an identity verification, but it's done so remotely. So, for example, if there's a camera up in the sky over there and it's scanning the crowd and I'm extracting biometric data from that crowd, that is a high-risk use of AI in the context of biometric extraction. If I'm doing it as I walk up to a door with the explicit intent of walking through that door and it requires the biometric extraction for me to go through the door, that is not necessarily considered high risk. And I want to be really careful here because, by the way, this is not legal advice. I've been instructed to tell you that multiple times in this presentation. But as far as we understand it, local analysis may be considered low risk when you're using AI for the purposes of a direct one-to-one action that you've explicitly opted in to do. So I want to go into the football stadium. My face is my ticket. I've explicitly opted in to do so. That should be allowed. I should be allowed to use AI to analyze the face under those provisions. For the purposes of access control, again, it can also be considered high risk under certain conditions when you're doing surveillance or one-to-many identification, again, using AI. So it's a bit of a mixed bag right now. We do think we're going to get more clarity around this over the next 3 to 4 months, especially as we start seeing further implementations, especially within the governments across the EU and within the UK. So when we talk about what to actually share, when we should use biometrics and what the applications are good, I think a lot of these are just going to become somewhat obvious, but the stuff that we're seeing where it works, where individuals get specific value from using their own face to do a thing. And that thing is usually in this terms of convenience, and that often comes in the form of payments or access to an event or venue or something of that nature. So we've seen broad-scale adoption, probably in no small part thanks to people like Apple and Samsung and others having used facial biometrics on our phones for so long, that people are now getting more comfortable, as long as they're comfortable with the providing entity, to share that data. And there's a really hard line that you have to draw here, though, and I don't have this on slides, but Lee and I were talking about this earlier on a panel. It's really critical that there's a barrier between the use that you're intending and then the additional potential use of that data. So, for example, if I use my facial biometric data to get into a stadium, that stadium should use it for things like concessions and for ticketing and maybe access to VIP areas or whatever I happen to have paid for. They should not be sharing that data with their concessioners, so that if I go into another stadium where I haven't explicitly shared my biometric data, that is a breach, as far as we understand it, of the boundaries established in the AI Act between point A and point B. So if they're sharing that data, or if you are operating it and you're sharing that data, we consider that a fairly hard line between point A and point B. The same thing with just base face data. So if I've opted in to getting into a metro station with my face biometrics, that is not an automatic default that it should be shared and used across all other transportation mechanisms, unless it is explicitly called out in the terms of use by the operating entity. So if it's a state or metropolitan area controlled type of thing, and I've opted into them, that's fine. But if I've opted into trains, that doesn't mean airports and it doesn't mean taxis. So be really careful about the implementations across those boundaries and the sharing of that data. Now, what's really cool about this, we can show you a demo too, but what's really cool about this is that you can apply the biometric in a way that is self-sovereign. So you can own it, and it can go nowhere past that if it's implemented in the right way. And let me talk about that in a second. But we've seen a bunch of use cases. They're the obvious stuff. Time and attendance, a ton of it worldwide. Time card fraud is still a thing. So we're seeing applications there broadly. But from an individual's perspective, it's travel, transport, and convenience are the biggest ones. Payment starting to take off as well. In fact, payment in ATM, cash machines in Asia are probably going to lead the way. We think we'll see that also take off in broad scale across European and UK economies, and then the US will catch up when we feel as though we can do so. Just a quick snap of how we do it. So I don't want to go through product stuff here, but let me actually go to the next slide. It'll be more valuable for you. The way that we extract biometric data and that you can use it is you can either send an image, or you can walk up specifically to a device and do an explicit opt-in. And that explicit opt-in is to simply grab an image of the face, analyze it locally, and generate the template. So that face template is generated, again, in our case, on a specific module inside of a secure element. The face template is then hashed and secured with SHA-256. So it's locally, we have a database of about 1,000 on the camera. But you can do 10 million if you want to behind it. It does not physically on the device. But again, that's just a 512-byte representation of what the face template looks like. And I'll show you an actual physical version of my own face template later on, just in case you want to take it and go play with it. I don't know what you're going to do with it, but it's a way for just to me at least show you the confidence that I know my face can't be reverse engineered into an actual face. And then as we talk about the physical sovereign identity, as it relates back to my own biometric data. So I really want to make sure that there's a mechanism that people can use their face for useful purposes in a one-to-one way. And I think I have it in my pocket. I've got you probably can't see it. It's just a QR code. It's just my actual face template in QR code form. If I'm using one of the systems that one of our partners has deployed, I can just go up, scan this, it'll look at my face, and it'll know who I am. If it's never seen the internet, it doesn't matter, because it's going to look at this, it's going to look at the 512 bytes, it's going to look at my face, it's going to generate a template for my face, and it's going to do a one-to-one match. Now, they're not going to be identical, right? Because by definition, your face changes either because I haven't slept in a week and a half, and I probably gained 10 pounds since I started traveling 2 weeks ago. Everybody looks different every day, so it's not an identical match. What we're looking for are 80 different markers, and again, Lee and I were joking earlier today that it's an arms race as to how many facial markers you're looking for. That's not the issue. We look for 80 different markers. Most companies look for around the same thing. We generate the depth map, and we look for relational things between nose and points across cheek and things of that nature, and those, of course, do change. Now, as you age, that will also change. So get back to the AI problem, we have to use AI to adapt to the temporal nature of humanity. As we get older, your face is going to change. So we've got to adapt that over time as well. But that then falls, again, into the acceptable use, we believe, for the AI Act within the EU. And it's QR. It can be like a BLE. If it's 500 bytes, you can stick it on anything. It works on Legit cards and HID cards and everything else. So we've seen it implementations across the board. But again, it allows me to, as an individual, not as me as an Intel RealSense person, to just maintain ownership of this and have a one-to-one wherever I go. And to my earlier point, it's not identifiable. So that's my actual face template. You're welcome to go nuts with it. Every vendor has their own version of how the template looks. So if I go to Paravision, they're going to create a template. It's not going to be the same as Intel's template. If I go to one of the open source versions, the same sort of situation, right? So if you're using multiple vendors to generate face templates, you'll have to do reconciliation across those template types. It's not impossible. We've got customers that do across 7, which is bananas, but it's easier if you're doing one, but certainly not impossible to maintain a matching database. And then we offer an algorithm just to go back and do a vector match across the different vectors that you see here within a vector database and figure out the closest match. We generally think that above an 80% threshold of confidence with our algorithm, the algo says 80%, probably good. What we've found in the real world is that 80% confidence is about twice the efficacy of a human being detecting like faces. So there's an explicit and implicit bias based on who you are and who you're familiar with. If you look at the NIST testing, and I encourage you to do this because it's actually kind of fun data, everybody runs there's thousands of different face verification stuff out there, right? But everybody runs their algorithms through NIST. NIST does not only accuracy verification, and we come up at like 99.8% against Visa images. There's Visa, there's Mugshot, and there's one other thing that's being used. I can't remember the third off the top of my head. But then they create the structure on matrix, and they will take people from a particular ethnicity in a particular country and map those against other ethnicities in other countries, and it's a gradient from like Northern European through various regions in Africa, through various regions in Asia. And the biasing analysis will tell you exactly how good it is at determining the difference between two people who are not native to your country, is the short version of that. We do pretty well there. A lot of people do really well there, so I'm not going to call that out too much. But it's really important to not screw that up, because earlier versions of face recognition algorithms were really bad at this, and we were seeing misidentifications in the wild of other algos that were doing some incomprehensibly poor versions of identifying people from different ethnicities. So that's gotten better across the board. So all vendors, I think, have improved. Now, one last quick thing, and I'll leave it a couple minutes for questions here. the right to be forgotten is still paramount in the context of GDPR in the EU and worldwide. So we try to make it easy. Just you can deprecate via API. We've got a REST API. You just say delete the face template. But you've got to make sure that you have a simple mechanism to remove it from the database. And then there's a lot we can go into on this. We generally recommend that there are 2 simultaneous databases that are maintained for all the face templates that are stored. One being the master record of all things that you've ever looked at, and one for that has the access controls applied to it. In both of those cases, you have to be in a position to deprecate them immediately. So you can do it by record number. You can do it by individual unique identifier. You can also do it. This is actually a really critical point. If you have multiple templates generated against a single person, and we've seen this happen before, you've got to go through and find the template, not just the record of the individual. So I could be Mike Nielsen. I might be Mike Nielsen 2 or 3 times if I've registered at different points. If you haven't done upfront reconciliation, you've got to go do the back-end reconciliation and pull all Mike Nielsens out of your database. And the best way to do that would be through an algorithmic lookup against the template and remove all the templates that match me, not just the ones that are associated to me, if that makes sense. And that's why it's really, really critical that you've got the performance of the algorithm working correctly, as well as the debiasing, because you don't want to yank out the wrong person in a like pair. One thing we did is we do faces in the wild, so we do LFW. We pulled about 10.5 million live faces in the wild as our data set. We then generate from that a like pair database that we do training against for like 150,000 pairs of people that look really similar that aren't related. And like I said, humans fail that all the time. Like I actually learned about people that I thought were the same person that were not the same person by using our own database for lookups. And then we generate synthetic pairs and synthetic individuals. So if I get a picture of my face, I need to then do rotation, pitch, and yaw to see different elements of the face generated as a result of that first image, because I may not have all of those from the registration. But to do that, I then need to go take that and then generate the synthetic versions of it to the tune of tens or hundreds of millions of faces to train against as well. Because it's, again, if you're walking up to one of these devices, you don't want to just walk up, get your face in the bounding box and stare at it. You want it to be able to catch you kind of as you're walking past in certain cases, especially for walk-bys, for access control, and things of that nature. So anyway, keep that in mind when you're looking at templates, and also keep that in mind when you're looking to deprecate the templates, because the deletion is more important, frankly, from a regulatory perspective than the creation in the first place. So that being said, that's all I got for slides. Any questions? I'm more than happy to take them. Like I said, take a look at the stuff. Our partners are here doing a one-to-one demo, so you can see the QR match to the face. And if you've got your passport, you can do, we're not keeping the data, by the way, just to be super clear. You can do a one-to-one match against your own passport just to test the system if you feel like it as well. So thank you, guys. Appreciate the time.